the floor mean that there's like just a thin strip of light coming above that brick wall. I sort of wonder if that that coming together of materials, because it is celebrating the distinction between the existing materiality of the structure and the new sort of parasite building, if that might happen with a bit more intentionality. And maybe you have thought about sort of the connection between the materials, but I'm sort of struggling to see that in some of your representation here.
I see. Yeah, I agree. I guess I haven't really thought of how the two materials are connecting. I was just like too head on like of having contrast in between two materials. Yeah, so maybe like with more intentionality of
Mm-hmm.
how
Something to think
contrast.
about.
Yeah.
The other comment that I'll add, and then I'll let somebody else jump in. I feel like the sort of corner space is a little bit underutilized. It's just open. It looks like open hardscape. And I think that that's an opportunity for potentially, I understand that you want to sort of encourage people to sort of slip into the public space that you've designed. I think that would be a great opportunity to incorporate softscape and some plantings. If you do want to leave it open so that the sort of volume of your building reads quite clearly, I think that's fine. But generally speaking, people are not drawn to quote unquote public spaces that are just open asphalt. If they're programmed in a particular way, if there's recreation provided, or if there's some sense of that you can occupy the space, I think then it becomes a different story. And it also might allow for a bit less of a sort of fishbowl feeling inside of the dining area. I think it's good that you want to encourage kind of visual interaction between the interior and exterior, potentially some exciting things happening on one side of the wall versus the other. And that might sort of encourage, I don't know, guest versus pedestrian interaction. But at the same time, I think you don't want those people to feel like they're constantly on display and sort of performing for the people on the street. And so that might be a way to sort of soften that relationship while still allowing for the interaction that you're interested in.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, Jenny, I have a question. Do I understand correctly? You have two courtyards, right? There's the corner one that you drew the perspective of, but there's also one on the other side of the glass tower.
Right.
Could you describe the different roles and qualities those two spaces have?
Yeah. So maybe from the section perspective is a clearer view of the front courtyard. It's this stepping down idea that utilized this space, and right behind.
I'm talking about the one that I think you have bicycles drawn in plan in it. Did I read that correctly? If you stop right there, I'll point to them.
The ones with the bicycles, that's I imagine it not as like a courtyard, but as a covered transition area for circulation.
Okay. Is it conditioned? Is it heated, or is it exterior environment?
It's interior condition.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think the one in the back corner with the tree is exterior. Is that right, Jenny?
Right. Correct.
Yeah, that's a little confusing. Maybe I was reading the tones in your plan, or I was interpreting them as meaning exterior spaces, because the light tone means exterior here and here, but not there, right?
I see. Yeah. Maybe I could have presented that more clear. But yeah, I imagine that as a transition area from the public to the private, and also leading up to like the semi-private area. Yeah, so I'll say like, kind of the heart of my hostel.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think, the big moves, I think, have some potential power to them, but I don't think you're exploiting them well. Like when you look at that upper right-hand perspective, the idea that you're sort of tearing down the side wall of the brick, you're kind of keeping the other three walls, and you have this new vocabulary of architecture, which is sort of spilling, occupying a part of that territory and then spilling out into the public realm. Like, I think that could potentially be a really strong and interesting building. I don't think it is yet, to be frank. Like there's the beginnings of a lot of things that I think could be great. That little stepping, that terracing down, to me is sort of the beginnings of an intention of taking the public space and having the ground plane manipulated very actively to encourage different kinds of occupation. But when you look at the site plan, it's, the actual sectional manipulation is sort of crammed up in that one corner, and you've got 4 times that space, which is just the flat asphalt that Talia was mentioning. And so I think you could take what you're starting to do and actually like follow those beginnings more fully, and it would benefit the project tremendously. And I also want to say one thing about the presentation. It's clear that you generated a pretty complete digital model of this project, and that lends itself to making experiential drawings and perspectives. It lends itself to the sectional cut model and the exploded axon. But I have to say, I'm incredibly frustrated to have only one plan of a 4-story building and no section. Like, I mean, you have a section cutting through that part, but I would say, for me, the value of, they don't have to be section axonometrics or section perspectives, but having a plan of every floor that, maybe not if you have 2 that are almost the same, but at least this project demands at least 3 plans. And I'd love to see a section that actually cuts through that courtyard that you drew a perspective of, the one that's trapped between the brick wall and the glass, and shows me the relationship of that courtyard sectionally to the other programs that happen between it and the street. And they're just not there. And so this is perhaps subjective, but I would say, like, in your next project, make sure you get those kind of classic drawings done, and don't sacrifice those at the expense of an extra perspective or 2, because they're you'll always be presenting to architects and designers, and we're very comfortable reading those drawings. So try and do that in the future.
Yeah, I agree. There are like a lot of moments in my project that I really sort of captured. Yeah, I agree.
Jenny, I had a question. Can you talk to the kind of the intentionality of the sequence, kind of redirecting the front door of the existing shell to kind of opening up from the courtyard space? Just wondering, kind of why you're taking the user through that.
Are you talking about the front courtyard?
Yeah, because I mean, I was just more interested in why you're kind of turning your quarter turning away from that main entrance, kind of that. For me, at least, I think there's an attitude to be had into like how you're kind of taking someone through this historic kind of facade and creating that as a threshold. And I was wondering why, what's your attitude really to why you're opening up kind of that front entrance and that front sequence to the open lot to the side.
4 minutes warning.
Okay. So at the beginning, I decided to have my entrance like on the street facing the neighborhood building, but then later on, I decided to open up into the front street intersection place, because I had this semi-public room that mimics the curve of the path, and I want to bring people in that direction by gathering people from all sides into that hostel instead of people coming from one small street. So I would say that's my main intention on designing it this way.
Jenny, could you elaborate a little more on your thought process of the kind of depression you created at the front door when you're coming off of the open courtyard there? I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that area.
I was inspired. I was thinking about the the characteristics of Pittsburgh, and I thought about how Pittsburgh is well known for having a lot of staircases. I thought it would be interesting thing to incorporate that into my design and to connect with that. It is not really shown through the project here, but my rooms are also designed in a way that's shows stepping. But yeah, like if I do another section view, it will definitely demonstrate better. That's something that I really regret not working on.
And I think that the beauty of the Pittsburgh stairway, at least the sort of public stairs, if that's something that you're drawing inspiration from, I know that there are plenty up in kind of the surrounding neighborhoods of Spring Garden, is that they sort of feel like these sort of secluded moments that are connecting. They're like secret pathways, right? That sometimes you're going through people's backyards essentially to connect from a public street down below to a public street up above. And there are these really special moments. So I really wish that if it was a critical element in your design, I wish that it was celebrated a little bit more, both representationally, but also based on the images that I am seeing of the stairs. I wish that experience of being in the stair was a little bit more, special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, similarly to one comment that we said at the beginning, you're not really involving the plaza much, but you're creating this. I mean, you're giving a hint of the importance, and you mentioned the desire of bringing the energy of the plaza in and the energy of the hostel out, but you're not really doing it much. So that could be explored further.
Yeah.
And I guess that was the last comment. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Okay, next we should have Yael.
Hi, I'm Yael. Let me get it started. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay, so first I wanted to explain that I chose to use my Miro board because I felt like the process in which you work on a project isn't linear enough to display your work through a slideshow. And I felt like it was important to see everything at once, kind of the way that you see it in a normal review. So, let's see. Okay. So The hostel project really focuses on utilizing Pittsburgh environment to maximize the potential of the form. So I allowed the form to really to be shaped by these solar studies that you'll see in the center there. Um, so the form itself of the hostel is really driven by the play of light on the site as well as the direction of the sun. So I allowed the form to wrap around the darker parts of the site, allowing for the courtyard to bathe in the natural light throughout the year. Um, so the void space in the central courtyard also provides a way for light to breach through and enter every room. All of the rooms kind of wrap around and surround the courtyard, with the circulation kind of wrapping around that in the darker parts. Um, and yeah, so the existing shell was initially retained in my design, but then I chose to subtract it and allow it to become kind of a low partition between the courtyard and a planted space. So this line of division extends through the hostel and divides at a point where the private rooms begin. So if you look, that's kind of represented here, and it's kind of where this planted situation happens there. So the public space of the hostel is mainly contained within this large double-story glass box. This transparency, not only from the outside to within, but also from the public to the semi-private above, welcomes guests and kind of draws them in from the courtyard and also allows views from the top down. And then the rooms, as I said before, are kind of surrounding the courtyard, and they're accessed through a ramp on the first floor that kind of raises the more private side of the hostel up a few feet, kind of to retain some privacy in that area, especially from the first floor courtyard space. And then the large windows and the smooth facade, not just with the opening windows for the rooms, but also the light wells for the circulation here, kind of create this almost stereotomic appearance where it's almost like this large form that's being kind of carved out in some areas. And then, yeah, wrapping around the hostel rooms themselves are the circulation path, which is mostly facing parts of the street that are less appealing, such as alleys or even another building. And so those are mostly lit by skylights. So there's not as much of a view to outside Pittsburgh, but more to the sky itself.
The end?
I think so.
Okay. Wasn't sure if we were waiting on something else. First comment from me, if I'm understanding correctly, the existing brick is really only retained in the sort of back corner. Could you indicate quickly on your plan maybe where it is?
Yeah. So here, the existing shell. Oh, I don't have drawing ability. Do you see my mouse?
Yep.
Okay, so the existing shell is this really low kind of, like it's just, I think, about 2 feet high. It's pretty low.
Okay. So it's more like it's just like a garden wall.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I guess that for me would be the first comment that I'd have is you have some really interesting, primarily subtractive moves in the way that the different volumes are coming together and being sort of carved away for these openings. And so for me, that feels like a missed opportunity to really engage in the existing shell as a volume to subtract from, as opposed to it's something that you can sort of cross over, and I see it. I do register the line in the perspective now that you've pointed out to me, but at the same time, I feel like that could have been a little bit more. The materiality of the existing structure could have allowed you to really articulate this sort of subtractive quality in ways that complement your building, and really that any materiality is, for me, sort of missing from these drawings. I mean, maybe there's a lot of concrete, and that's what all the white is, but it's sort of white box. It feels like that that tactile quality. And I think I've said this already on a couple of presentations, but not just in your studio, but for me personally, I'm craving tactility and materiality right now. Like we're all stuck inside our drywalled houses and or apartments in my case, right? So I'm really missing like going out and like touching things and seeing other architectural materials. So maybe that's why I'm sort of dwelling on this, but especially in this project, I think materiality is an opportunity for you as a designer to really complement the spaces that you're designing. It's not an extra thing. It's not a secondary thing. It's part of the spaces that you're designing. So I think a little bit more on that. If you continue to develop this project for a portfolio or something, I would definitely go back to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, continuing some of those thoughts, I think, I can respect that maybe, I mean, it's a clear position, right? Like, I don't want the brick walls. I think I'm a masonry lover, so I'm a little personally offended, but I think it's fine. Like, I think you can certainly take that position. But one of the challenges, I think, and it would be helpful if you did, though, to be really clear on the reasons why. Like you actually, you're not interested in the contrast between new and old, or you want the exterior to be consistent. You want a sort of a monolithic institutional character for the project. One of the challenges you might be able, I guess what I'm saying is you might be able to have your cake and eat it too. One of the challenges of monolithic masonry is that it doesn't really work for an exterior wall, right? If this back wall, get my annotations out. If this back wall, let's just say
sorry.
you were going to keep the brick, right? If this wall were.
Something happened to my internet and I missed everything.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying that I think, I think it's a position that you're certainly, is one of the positions you can take is to diminish the existing brick presence. But one of the points I was going to make to Talia's comments was you might be able to, like, if you're really interested in having a stereotomic white volume on the exterior, you still might benefit from having using the brick in places. If this back wall that I've marked this is where the existing brick is, right? Am I reading that correctly? You may not have kept it, but that's where one of the current brick walls is of this height. Yeah, so that wall's going to have to be insulated, so you're not going to be able to keep it both on the inside and the outside. And if you want kind of a uniform materiality for the outside, you could insulate and put the white stucco or whatever it is on the outside, and actually keep the brick on the inside of this wall, which I think is this wall here, right? Inside the building. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So, like, to me, that would benefit the interior. Yeah, maybe less monolithic, but you're already introducing another material here. I'm not sure. Is that wood on the other side of the hallway?
Wood paneling.
Yeah. So it's not like you're saying like, yeah, I'm Aris Mateus. No matter what I build this building out of, everything is going to be white because I'm going to cover it with white, right? So I guess there's room to kind of to operate within sort of intentions that might counter celebrating the brick everywhere, but also doesn't completely eliminate it from the site, because it is there. I mean, I would argue the reality of even solid brick walls is they're not really monolithic anyway, right? When the folks who are close to the construction of that brick wall did not think of every brick as the same the way we do now. That was back in the days of bricks being batch kilned, and some of the bricks were, clinkers because they were near the fire and they got really hard, and some were undercooked, and those were the ones on the inside of that wall. So even a 2-foot thick brick wall that's bricks from one side to the other, in fact, for the most closest to their construction, was actually conceptualized as something less than completely monolithic because of the different characters of the brick. So there's room for that, I think, in your project.
Yeah.
I think the invention of the beds, these two axons on the left in the middle, is really nice. It's you're creating spaces that have sectional variation, that have varying degrees of privacy. I mean, the person who gets this bed maybe is not the luckiest person in the world because everyone's walking right by their bed to get their others. But the difference between this side of the wall and this side, I think, is quite nice, and it's taking advantage of the section in a very intelligent way. So I think that's a strong aspect of the project. I wanted to return to one point you made at the very beginning, which was basically the massing strategy of your project was about the light. You're occupying essentially the eastern edge of the site and layering the programs against the west side of the site. If I'm reading your site plan correctly, are these little studies, this is north up, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there is maybe something else going on. Typically if you are all about maximizing light, you would face that courtyard south and not west primarily. So I wonder about that. If the massing came first and you're justifying the massing, or if you truly are kind of using digital light studies to find the maximum solar exposure of those courtyard surfaces. I think either way is fine, but it's one of the things you need to make sure you're being honest with yourself in the process in terms of what actually drove the massing strategy of the building.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it wasn't the light, but there's a question, it raises the question in my mind. Also, if you have all your rooms kind of layered against the western side, the eastern light they're getting is actually through these openings in the hallway rather than into the rooms where the sleeping spaces where you might want light in the morning.
So
and I mean,
northern light there that you marked.
That's northern light, right? Oh, right. Yep. But the eastern light would be, if this condition, I assume, is happening along this edge as well.
So along there that's this condition here.
That condition. So this is eastern light, right? That's the morning light from there.
And yeah, I think that the quality of the different kinds of light coming in, the northern light versus the western light versus the eastern light, I think they are very different, right? And they have different. Western light tends to be very hot, and it tends to be, that's where the sun is setting, and it has a different feel to it. And I think that might lend itself to these different conditions, kind of giving them different identities. But again, I want to see that more in the representation, sort of clarifying that kind of distinct quality of light from one to the other. Right now, it feels a little, in the two interior renderings that I'm seeing, they seem quite similar, which is maybe the intent. But I think that if the direction of the light is very different, then the quality of light is also going to be quite different.
4 minutes warning.
If I could make a quick point, I know I've taken more than my fair share of time on this one, but I wanted to, the critiques I offered, I'm not suggesting that you establish a set of intentions at the beginning of a project and then you just unfold them across time. I think we all know that design doesn't work that way, but I think the value of kind of recognizing where the desires come from, whether it be massing or light quality or something else, I think the projects benefit, I guess, from recognizing those situations, and then you're modifying the design as you go through a process, but you're also modifying the argument. So like if you feel like this massing is really what you want, and you realize that it's all those surfaces are primarily facing west, like you develop a narrative for the project which takes advantage of that, right? So these are young people, they're going to be up late at night, in a new environment traveling, and they're not going to be up first thing in the morning. Actually, the most important time for the social life of this place is the afternoon, where the light is in the west. Like there's a way of kind of finding logics and arguments that actually fit with the architecture, and it's not it's not a one-way street. Like I've only met one or two people who can successfully do this, where they from first principles say, this is what my project's going to be about. And then they spend the rest of the time just unfolding those principles into architecture. I think for almost all of us, it's a real back and forth conversation between, some intuitive moves, kind of finding the logics in those moves and the narratives that make sense. And then going back to the project and saying, okay, given what I've now learned about my project, how do I then modify the architecture to help support the argument to make a kind of unified condition where I have a architectural proposal and I have a narrative and a set of arguments for what the architecture is, and they are seamlessly knit together. Right?
Yeah, and that back and forth is really important, right? It's not reverse engineering your project, that you found something that works and now you have to explain why it works because you've discovered it. You've discovered something great about your project, and now your project should benefit from that greatness, right? And sort of build on it. Just to echo what he's saying, I think that's a really great comment for any student who might be listening right now.
Mm-hmm.
I had just one quick comment. I was really excited about the idea that you're taking down that existing brick wall, because I think something to think about going forward is like, what do you do with that raw material? Can it become like a kind of composite or some sort of like treatment on the interior of the building? Or just kind of thinking about that resource flow and just going forward, because you are taking a very strong stance on like with the existing building not being there anymore, just kind of a trace of it on the ground. So just consider, when you are making those sort of moves, like what the implications are, kind of the equity for the community as well.
Thank you.
So we have 15 seconds left, but if nobody else has any other questions, I would move on. Thank you, Yael.
Thank you.
So Thomas, last but not least, it's your turn. Share your screen and good luck.
Can you guys see?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm Thomas Chen, and so this is my project. So this project is conceived mainly as an aggregation of forms that interact with the pre-existing brick shell in a manner similar to OMA's Dutch Parliament extension and Prada Foundation. Instead of holding the brick existing context as a sacred object, the building itself seeks to add to the patchwork of history that pre-exists on the site condition. As the double courtyard scheme develops, with a courtyard within and one out of the shell, it becomes increasingly important to bridge the two sides. This is where a sequence comes in. Sequence becomes an important vehicle that not only informs the visitor's experience, but it also becomes a means to weave the two-sided scheme together, connecting the courtyard and connecting the hostel to the neighborhood. Approaching the building from the street, the rotated volumes and various openings in the brick shell begin to suggest levels of phenomenal transparency, giving cues to the experiential and visual connections between the interior courtyard and the exterior. Once in the building, more and more of the relationship between the in and the out are revealed as the visitor find their way up to the main floor of the hostel. While engaged in this architectural promenade, an unraveling takes place. The multiplicity of space slowly showing itself step by step throughout the sequential experience. The formal language of the building plays a key role in the experiential experience as the orthogonal pieces of the hostel about the economical, unitized, high-density living quarters, while the unorthogonal pieces are about the sensory and tactile experience. The rotation of the central volume, in a way, also bestows an autonomy to the form. As its projections extend beyond its original geometry, it begins to morph and shift elements of the hostel, such as the arrangement of the pods, the facade, and the exterior courtyard, and the reflecting pole. Finally, the programmatic elements of the hostel manifest itself within various spaces, mainly arranged along the second story. The two tower-like volumes, one horizontal and the other vertical, contain the private pods and rooms existing beyond the shell, while the public spaces of the hostel exist within. This organizational strategy is informed by Hermann Hertzberger's idea that public and private should not exist in a binary, but much rather on a spectrum, because space, kind of like humans, we exist um, on a level of interconnectedness and interrelationship with one another. So in this case, the private spaces are organized in a sense to facilitate a sense of community, seen in like the U-shaped clusters and plan and their outward-facing orientation, while on the other hand, the public spaces in turn become about introspection and reflection. This idea is particularly emphasized when one is sitting within the rotated shell. It's a really powerful moment in space, which is all about an intimate relationship between the new building, the old building, the sky, and the visitors themselves. This space mostly all face the interior courtyard. The public spaces mostly all face the interior courtyard, which is not unlike of a Japanese garden. The act of looking out also becomes about looking in. Thank you. So I guess I'll move to the mural right now. Uh, Give me a second. Okay, we're on Miro now.
Thanks for the narrative, Thomas. That was really helpful.
Thank you. Francisco, your mic is muted.
The diagram with the five line drawings above your section, is that a processional sequence you're diagramming? Like, are these referring to different levels, or can you
Yeah.
talk us through that diagram?
So it's kind of like what part of the building kind of slowly becomes like unraveled as you like experience it. So obviously the first one, one of the biggest things of like the building you see is that really massive tower. So you walk under it to enter the building, and then you kind of find your way to the first floor, the ground floor of like the rotated volume, which you kind of have to enter and go through this this tunnel almost, where in the rendering you'll be like you'll go through this box underneath here and you kind of pop out into here, right? So you kind of experience that little section, and then you move up these stairs, then you suddenly realize that you're outside again, like over here in this volume, which is kind of what this diagram starts to show. And then the rest of the building kind of unravels itself like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, clearly you have a strong command of graphics and representation and formal manipulation. So I'm going to just compliment you on that in passing, because I want to ask some other things. But the presentation is nice, and the graphic quality and the communication is all very strong. So in your project, clearly you have this strong interest in kind of an interior life and exterior kind of presence in the city for the building, which I think is a very strong backbone to kind of hang the project on. But one of my primary questions for you is, do you see this project as kind of a series of volumes correlating to expression of particular programs or uses, sort of on the model of, do you know Jim Sterling's Leicester Engineering Building? It's a series of volumes.
Yeah.
So that I would call that kind of the quintessential form follows function modernist building, right? There's whatever it is on the five different blocks, and each one has a kind of formal language. They share materiality, but each one kind of has a formal language which is particular to a particular use within the building, and then they're collected into a formal composition of basically juxtaposition. And I think that may be true. You're talking at one point about the different uses being in different blocks.
Yeah.
But there is another way of understanding a project like this, which is there are a series of figures which are less about the interior uses and more about kind of exterior presences or the marking of entries or certain kinds of public institutional presences that you want this project to have in the city, and uh, and you know, the program could be mixed and matched within those. Like those might not necessarily change if the program you received had a few less hotel rooms and a bit more square footage of public space. And then the follow-up is then on the inside, in the interior life, do you see those kind of figures that span the masonry wall having similar qualities to the exterior, or are they different on the interior than the exterior? When I say the interior, I mean the inside of the building. I mean the inner courtyard side of the brick shell.
So I'll try to answer like the first.
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of questions in one.
Yeah, I think for at least in the design process, I don't think I went about it in kind of like Jim Sterling's way of like form follows function. I think initially I went through like a more of a form finding like experience first before kind of settling with kind of what I felt like was a good composition for the building, and then I began to kind of fill out the inside, right, like flesh it out. But as that was happening, I kind of realized how like some of the ways the building can kind of the way the building is formed kind of can shape what goes on inside. Like for example, like here where the pods, the individual like sleeping pods are located. And initially they were just like rows and rows of just beds, like just 2 rows of stacked beds and pods. And I think in plan, it just didn't seem right because there's something that could be done, right? And then I kind of changed it and kind of morphed it. So I guess in a way, it was also kind of like a tug, like a tug of war type of process. What you were mentioning earlier about like kind of having to change the argument a little as the design goes along. I think that's kind of what I was thinking about. And in terms of what the courtyard would be on the inside, I think the courtyard in the interior of the courtyard is just slightly different than what it would feel like on the outside. I guess in plan, in this drawing, you can kind of see it's pretty much secluded from the exterior. But what I was trying to do, like one of the biggest problems I faced was just like it felt too much like 2 different projects, the inside and the outside, at times. And I guess one way I tried to address it was in plan. There's these revolving doors. Well, not revolving doors, but these glass doors here that if the hostel or the community decides to host like an event or whatever, this becomes like this one big plaza or something that connects the inside and the outside, and it kind of connects the 2 together, while also like allows me to kind of compose the facade a little bit with just another opening. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, you're less interested in expressing functionality and more interested in what I would call figuration. Essentially, it sounds like you operated quite intuitively, which I think is also okay. Like, you know, there's these kind of discussions that as architects we have around authorship, and you know, there's I think my personal opinion is we tend to fall on the side of like being conduits or arguing projects as conduits of outside forces, right? Like there was context, there was program, there was site circumstances, and I just discovered what those conditions were and the building designed itself. And so I respect the acknowledgement that you're kind of operating as an author and you're interested in this kind of figuration of spaces, like that top piece where you're just talking about the different rooms. To me, the element where the difference between inside and outside is most present is actually, my marker out, is actually this one, right? Because in this one, in the plan, you know, it's clearly a projected object on the outside, right? On the inside, oops, yeah, my markup's not going to work if you move around too much. But, but that's okay. But on the outside, it's clearly an object, right? That's a building, right? It's a figure that has corners and edges, and it's an object. On the inside, it actually seems to align with the back wall of the rest of the program. And then overhead, you just have this little semicircular piece, which becomes a figure. So there is a figuration, a kind of a massing presence on the inside. There's one on the outside, but they're completely different in character, right? One is, and so that's where it gets really interesting to me, because I think actually it's okay for me. It's okay, and maybe even better, that the inside is different than the outside. Maybe each of these elements actually bridges that divide a little bit differently, right? The diagonal one is clearly much more the same on both sides. It's a tube. It's, you know, yes, it grows in section on the inside, but it has a similar presence inside and out. I think the one that has the hotel rooms or the hostel rooms seems like is also very different from outside to inside. And so there's something interesting going on there. And I think, like, as you become, as you spend, you know, as you become more, you're quite mature, but as you continue to investigate these interests, I would try and really begin to, these are the kind of interests that extend beyond solving a particular project, right? They actually become a broader interest that you will tend to carry across a number of projects. I think you could really begin to, the more you can force yourself to be specific about what those issues are, independent of the project you're actually solving in the site and the program, I think the more pointed the way you'll be able to kind of develop your personal set of architectural interests over time.
4 minutes warning.
Okay, let me stop talking because I'm done taking too much time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try not to echo comments that were already made. I think the as you're talking through your process a little bit, Thomas, I really appreciate the sort of opportunistic overlap of spaces that's happening on the interior. I really appreciate also that your plans are really clear and really easy to read. It helps us to sort of connect all of your other drawings, which beautiful drawings. I think in some cases, a comment that I have warned you about before, I think, make sure that the graphic quality of the drawing does not override your design, like what you're trying to communicate about the design intent, because I think sometimes the graphics get a little, it becomes more about the visual quality of the drawing than anything else, but they are beautiful drawings. But I really, like I said, I appreciate where the volumes on the interior sort of start to dissolve and open up into each other. I also think that the doors on the first floor, very overwhelming to me and very clear in plan. That might be, if you're thinking about it more as something that could open up completely, it might be something more like a nano wall, right? That sort of collapses entirely. If that is sometimes a completely open space and sometimes doors. Whereas in other moments, you might want a more clear threshold. And that might help distinguish between different kinds of entries that you have, the different doorway. And maybe that is something you've thought about, but it's not quite reading for me yet in the project. I think I really want to occupy this interior courtyard space. It seems really interesting and again sort of captures the for me anyway, it makes it feel sort of urban, the whole plan in how you've juxtaposed these volumes on the interior. I question something that I question about the design, and maybe more about the communication of the design than the design itself. When I go to the site plan, is just there are a lot of like industrial parking lots, and the site is maybe less exciting than you want it to be, and I see that very clearly in the site plan. I almost wish that you could show us in this drawing in particular how your building starts to activate the larger site, if that's what it's trying to do, right? If these volumes are trying to engage in somehow the sort of surrounding intersection, which is, I don't know this intersection that intimately, so I don't know how much traffic is actually there or how much foot traffic is there, but could you speculate on how the position of the hostel and your various courtyards starts to activate the urban site as opposed to just within your building? So for me, the site plan would be a great way to sort of show that and talk about that a little bit. And I'll shut up since we are short on time.
I think
Yeah, we have
just
20 seconds.
I think just like I don't know, just to react on that a little bit earlier, and like Francisco talked about how I kind of just acted more a little bit on intuition in this case. I think a part of it is because like the existing site context right now, it is kind of just kind of old and just kind of bummy a little bit. There's lots of industrial stuff going on. So in that way, I was like, wait, okay, we could be really contextual here, but what's significant here to react to? And I guess that kind of eventually like played out in how I drew my site plan as well.
But again, I think that you can think about what it will be after your building is there, as opposed to what it is now.
Right.
Just something to think on.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Thomas. So in theory, we just went through our break. So we're just waiting from Jeremy how to handle the transition to the next session. But I guess if you want to take like a quick break, let's see. Exit room. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Yes. I guess we want return to main session right now.
Thomas. Also, don't say experiential experiences.
Did I say that?
Calling you out.
Oops.
I'm just in the process of assigning folks to their appropriate review room. This will just take me another 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll put the students in their rooms and then we'll go ahead and get started momentarily.
Hi, folks. Is this my new group here?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Hey, Manuel, I like your place.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
You know
cool.
where it comes from, right?
Say again?
You know where it comes from. It's the App movie.
Excuse me, please?
The App movie. I don't know if you movie like that animation movie. It's just that living room though. So it's a virtual background.
Cool. No, I actually didn't recognize that.
Yeah,
but I like the movie a lot.
yeah.
Cinematic classic.
Exactly. How are you, Talia?
I'm pretty well. How about you, Manuel?
Good. Nice to see you here.
Nice to see you too.
All right, so I think we should be all here now. Bea, are you with us? Yeah, okay.
Yes, I am. Sorry for that. And Eric, I suggest you turn down the volume just a little bit because if not, there might be some echo.
Sure, let me do that.
Thanks. We live in the same house.
He's upstairs. How's that, better? Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Good, okay.
All right, so I think we should get started. Claire, I think you start this second session of the morning. So please share your screen and keep track of the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see my slide?
We can, yeah.
Okay. So hi, my name is Claire and I'll be presenting my urban hostel project. So this urban hostel project is primarily focused on exploring the layering of spaces within the existing brick shell on site, creating layers of interaction within the hostel and also allowing the hostel to relate back to the Pittsburgh community, both visually and physically. So the hostel volumes are inserted into the brick shell, and this existing shell is objectified in such a way that it serves as a belt that holds all the hostel components together. And these volumes then extrude out of the shell, making a visual and physical connection with the context through its roof form, which is the reinterpretation of the dwelling roofs in the surrounding neighborhoods.
These volumes are then elevated above ground with pillars serving as the primary structural supports, lifting the weight off the ground and making them hover above, and then opening up the first floor to allow for more public interaction. So the first floor mainly consists of public and semi-public spaces, and the open plan intends for people to flow through the spaces more freely. The second floor consists of 4 building blocks in which holds the bedroom bunks. Each of the bedroom bunks can be seen as a micro community and a cluster of these bunks within the building blocks from a larger sense of community. And these blocks of spaces are connected with the public spaces below with the central courtyard. This creates a gradient from the relatively more private bedroom bunks to the communal courtyard public spaces. So diving into the first floor plan, it creates offsets with the existing shell, creating several threshold conditions between the new and the old, where people can experience visually or physically occupying those spaces. The plan strives to create a maximum transparency from space to space through the use of concrete pillars, glazing, and minimum use of structural walls, as seen next to the stairs, and also one in the cafe space over here. So the 2 spaces on the end of the brick wall, on the ends of the brick walls are more public. So this one is the consists of the main entrance and then the lobby area, and then the upper one over here is the cafe. And the 2 spaces in the center are semi-private spaces for the guests, which has stairs that has access to the volumes above. So the public spaces have walkways around them, which opens up the plan because people can walk around them freely. And this enhances the transparent public sense of the spaces on the first floor. Moving to the second floor, the 2 stairs connect the 4 volumes in an L shape. So one here and then another one there. And then there are occupiable windows that protrude out to interact with the existing shell over here and then over here on that side. So the bunks in the larger volumes are placed in the center, allowing circulation around them and creating layers of connection between people. The bunks in the smaller volumes in the center are located closer towards the central courtyard, creating a more visual connection with the courtyard and the spaces below. So in this hostel program, there are 3 types of sleeping bunks. The first type occupies 2 people with its own bathroom or shower space. The second type consists of 4 people, occupies 4 people with communal bathrooms inside the larger volume. And then the third type occupies families with individual bathroom shower space over here. So these bunks are designed with the intention of maximizing efficiency and space within the volume, and at the same time allowing opportunity for communities to gather, whether it's within the individual bunks or a collection of them together. So this hostel is less about protruding out of the brick shell and making a strong visual statement within the neighborhood, but rather it's more about manifesting the existing sleep with new components and exploring the interior activities and connections that these components or these volumes bring, as well as how the sense of community can manifest within the existing shell. And then just sort of trying to bring the community inside the shell while the volumes peek out and give a glimpse of what's going on in the interior to the outside. So that was my presentation, and then now I'll move back to Miro for discussion.
Thank you, Claire.
Find a number of things about this project very strong. I like very much the way the expression of the sections with the floating objects on the second floor and the lightness of the construction on the first floor that allows these second floor volumes to read as objects in the space. 1, 2, I like the way they peek over the top of the brick and the way that they would be visible and, as the student mentioned, mimic the surrounding buildings around, so that you are making a clear connection to the context. I also like the kind of radical way in which you haven't occupied the exterior courtyard or exterior space that goes to the corner in the way the other students that I've critiqued have. I think it's exceptional that everything should be contained inside the brick volume. That said, my criticism is that these objects to me in 3 dimensions seem almost too tight inside the existing brick buildings, and the connection structure and the connection between these floating structures and the perimeter seems to be very much the same all around. I wish the either the volumes could have been smaller, or perhaps that you could have let loose of some of your determinist your determined quality not to use the outside, so that you could have created stronger 3-dimensional experiences on the inside that would be indeed more varied.
Right.
I'm going to jump in really quickly, Claire, just because I'm not, I keep getting switched back and forth between the 2 breakout rooms, so I'm not quite sure what's going on, but so I might cut out. But I just wanted to say, and I'm sorry, Eric, I missed some of your comments because of the switching back and forth, but I really appreciate this sort of nesting dolls volume inside of a volume. I think that the spaces sort of around and between the interstitial volumes is potentially very interesting. For me, the missed opportunity, and I think we've seen this in a couple of projects so far, is that big open courtyard space that's, I mean, on the corner, the public area entryway at the intersection. As far as I can tell from looking at these drawings, there's nothing really happening there, and I think that that's a missed opportunity. That's something that you potentially could have engaged in a little bit more, if nothing else, as this sort of preface to your building, or a sort of introduction. It doesn't necessarily need to be the same thing. It doesn't necessarily need to do the same thing, but I think it's an opportunity to sort of reach out to the neighborhood, as opposed to maybe as a foil to the sort of layers of enclosure and envelope that you have happening within the building. And again, I don't know if I'm going to disappear, so I'm going to cut myself off now.
For me, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the striation from along the long spatial striation from along the long dimension of the brick shell is really effective. I also like the kind of restraint and just saying, no, I'm gonna stay inside the shell. And it seems like you've been careful in kind of registering the entrances to where the larger opening is on the south, or I guess maybe on the west side, and also where that brick tower was. This is the first project I've seen that actually seems to be using the footprint of that brick tower as the entry on the east side, I think it is. So I like all of that. I don't mind the narrowness of some of the interstitial spaces, like the kind of very medieval urban quality that some of those spaces have could be quite strong. And in fact, I actually like the upper floor more than the lower floor. I know they're very different uses, but this idea that you have openings in the shell of the boxes you've made that are not registered necessarily to the openings in the brick shell that came with its own sort of logics for where its windows were, I think could be quite nice. And I miss it a little bit on the lower level. Like, I don't know that the lower level has to be 100% glass. To me, it wouldn't hurt if it had a little bit of planar opacity, and you read that striation a little bit more strongly on the lower level. But I completely agree with the idea of this sort of nested quality being very, very strong, and I like that it's driving the larger strategy, but also how you're how you're creating the beds in the hostels. A few questions come up in my mind. I think I wonder about connecting the different layers. Like you've decided to make two stairs with these in this middle layer that then you bridge over to the two end layers where all the rooms are. I mean, it does make some sense because those edge layers are going to be have a little more privacy than the ones in the middle. But it seems like there's another strategy where you have many more stairs. You know, there's a quality of excess, I think a very positive quality of excess to this project. It's obviously not particularly efficient in the amount of exterior wall it has. I think all to good effect. And I wonder if you couldn't also have that, if you wouldn't benefit from that quality of excess in stairs. I could see this project having 4 stairs or even 6. So you actually, when you go upstairs, you're actually already engaging a much smaller community of whatever it is, the 8 people who you're going to be closest to you when you're sleeping. But yeah, I think it's a very nice project. The other thing I should ask about is the one thing that you did that really isn't about spatial quality, but much more about symbology, is the restatement of the pitched roof, or a variation of the pitched roof in these objects you made. You know, they're pretty far set back. I'm not sure that they're going to read as strongly as you think they might on the, you know, when I'm on the sidewalk or on the street somewhere. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm in my 50s. I worry about that one moment of a kind of interest in symbolic expression in a project, which isn't particularly, you know, isn't a core kind of driver of the rest of the project.
Yeah, I guess like for those volumes, especially at the angle where they're formed from a lower street view, like that's quite close to the brick wall, I guess it would be hard for people to see the roofs. So yeah, that's something that I actually haven't really considered, because I've always looked at it from a very straightforward sectional cut. So to me, it seems pretty obvious, but then taking a step back, I guess that's a really good point. I haven't thought of that.
It seems that your scheme is so interior oriented that it's been at the expense of the outside. I mean, I would have loved to have seen a rendering from the outside looking up, seeing the roofs, as Francisco was saying, rising up above, and then we could have seen whether you would have been successful. I also agree with what one of the other critics said about exploring the outside space at the corner by not locating your program volume on the outside. You're really creating an opportunity for yourself to have a beautiful exterior space. And what that space looks like will define the connection if you're building to the community. So I would have liked to have seen what you could have done with that. Would it be gardens? Would it be some sort of other volumetric expression that might mimic something of what's going on in the inside? I'm not sure, but that would form an important relationship that you're not expressing in this drawing set.
Right.
You know, one great view that you had at the very beginning was the Google Maps aerial view. That was phenomenal. And at least it would capture the building in the context. It was a very successful representation for your portfolio. Consider that.
Definitely.
Also, Claire, I wouldn't have left behind on the mirror board that slide that you had in your presentation of the showing how all the configurations of the bedrooms or the pods were thought or were designed. I think that slide was really great. I do agree with the kind of character, the internal character of the whole project. And a really forceful statement, which is I'm not gonna even touch the half, you know, like half of the plot that you have been given. I'm not gonna even touch it. I'm gonna leave it untouched, and I'm not gonna even care about, you know, designing that. I think it has it's a two-edged sword because from a point of view, I think it's a forceful statement. Like my project only looks inwards, so it's only focused on the interior of the shell. So makes it stronger in a point. But also, I would argue, well, you've been giving as well the other half, so what is it to be, you know, next to the main intervention, right? Other than that, I think the section perspective is quite enjoyable. I think I really appreciate the degree of the resolution of it. Also, the floor plans, how you've been, you know, curious about how the buildings are, how the walls are built, um, and the relation with the shell. I think there are some nice moments of where you open up the uh, the windows, so they are not like something that is read at a surface level, but they become volumes and they try to
Mhm.
engage the existing shell. I think I really appreciate those moments. Also, the manipulation of the ground, uh, of the section of the ground. If you look at the section perspective, we don't see like a planar surface, but rather we see like that you carefully kind of, you know, establish some sort of uh, new ground condition. I really appreciate that, which is in connection with the what's happening above. So kudos for that.
Mhm.
I agree with the comments about the strength of this scheme. One comment I made in the previous session that I'd like to make now. I'm concerned about the light in Pittsburgh and the way it would affect these small spaces that you're creating on the inside. As you push this scheme forward, I'd really like to see drawings that focus more on the quality of the light in the scheme and not just
Mhm.
the forms. That would help you understand the experience much more.
Okay.
Okay, I think we should move on. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Mhm. So Tony, you want to go next?
Okay, yeah, I'll be sharing my screen. Okay. Hi, my name is Tony, and my project started with by identifying two spectrum that's really important of the project. And the first spectrum is the spectrum of privacy, and the second spectrum is the spectrum of importance. So as the program can be classified into the public area, the semi-public area, and then the private area, I decided to kind of group all of these program like into a list of and then that is um also oriented into its height and also how close to its center. So the first floor will be on the public area, the second and then the above floor will be semi-public and private area. So that's by height. And the more close to the center area, you'll be the most important as what I view, which is the public area, and then the most outer one is actually gonna be the public area. So after identifying these two spectrum, I then group and then orient all the value around an axis because I want to encourage movement and interaction around a fixed area. And that's moving both vertically and also kind of spreading it out while rotating around this axis. Um, so going into a little bit into the detail, a person will enter through the space by uh, going through this large courtyard rather than going directly from the outside. So like the person that's living in this facility will actually have to circle around, which kind of identifying them entering this area that's no longer no longer the outside the public. And each of the semi-public public area is accomplished is is attached with another upper floor of outdoor space that's providing more like outdoor space than other than the courtyard on the first floor. After rising above the public area, the public area is on the first floor, which is standard 10 feet high floor. But then after that, all the above floor is actually offset by 5 feet. So it's kind of so it's more like weaving through together and also kind of interconnected conceptually. And functionally, this allows people to look into the floor that's directly above and the floor that's directly below without any interference. Because after they're offset by 5 feet, and people can actually have a direct view on both of the floor. And going to the concept of the sleeping area, which is kind of also following this concept of weaving through space and then kind of offsetting, is that I offsetted the bed, and rather than having a normal bunk bed, which is people having being directly on top of each other, is partially on top, but then not always on top. So this way, it'll actually create more space for people on the top bunk. So people, there's actually a four, I think, or 5 feet high for the whole top bunk, so people won't worry about bumping into their head. And then it also encourage like interaction between people on the top bunk to the bottom bunk, because they can face each other. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Tony, did I hear you say that the primary entrance is through the courtyard and in the back there? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And these doors here are just for the cafe, is that right? And for the public bathroom here?
Yeah. So these is technically you can still enter through the cafe and then from the cafe enter the area of the lobby, but then and then the other door is going to the bike rental, and then technically you can still go down. But then the major entrance identified by this like four like stamp of doors is like why then to be having people moving through the street.
And am I getting to that from here, or am I getting to that around the end of there?
Around here, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the idea of some sort of spatial sequence leading up to your entry is a good one, but I think it's going to be, I mean, the person who works in this cafe, you're going to drive them crazy because every person who approaches your building is going to open these doors and say, I'm trying to find the hostel, where do I go, right? You need to give some sort of public clue that, this is actually the place where you might find an entrance to the building, right? Whether it's a canopy or, I mean, I think there's devices, architectural devices you can use to do that, but I don't think, as I understand your building, that you're yet kind of helping people understand that that's a major public entry point. I don't think that would read so well. That's I think that's a fixable problem. The primary premise of this figure, this kind of shape that has these fingers, I think is an interesting one, and it seems to me like it's more powerful where this figure is kind of capturing these spaces between the shape of your building and the regular rectangular brick shell. You had a perspective or an axonge where this brick was transparent. Yeah, like I can imagine those spaces could be potentially quite powerful, but it's hard to, that would be something I think where it would certainly warrant a perspective to show those qualities. On the other side, where the guts of the building are spilling out to the front, I find it a little less convincing in terms of the intention behind the public presence of the building. You didn't talk a lot about that, but to me, the argument for that side could be strengthened. And I do quite like the idea of a social stair kind of in this corner where there's a lot of interaction, people seeing each other. I wonder if it couldn't be wider. And when I see kind of this condition in your section, I wonder if there's really enough space for those kind of visual connections to happen. This one seems a little more promising, but it's hard also to know exactly how airy, how much volume there is between those stairs from this drawing here. But
I think it might be a little bit more visible on the plan, since it's actually quite a bit of space.
Yeah, is that an elevator in the middle?
Yeah, that's elevated in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's a terrible idea, because if the whole point is to see across the stairs and to see up a level and see, you know, your friend that might be up a level and you're trying to generate social interaction, I think the last thing you want to do is put a solid object in the middle of that stair, right? It's going to block half of the potential interactions that you're generating, your intention behind that situation. And then just one other comment. I think you're doing your project a real disservice by not situating it in the context more comprehensively. Like we have this drawing, which helps us understand how it sits in the site. But if we hadn't seen, you know, 5 other projects before yours, I would have no clue how your project really relates spatially to the city. Like your sections don't really connect across the street. This drawing doesn't show the context. These don't show the situation in the city. So for an urban project, I would encourage you to try and get more of the context in the representation of the project itself.
Yeah, I really agree with many of the comments you've made, Francisco, especially the connection of the building to the community. I find it really hard to understand what that would be. It seems that the first thing that you've done is made the decision to destroy one of the 4 walls of the building. And that's a really big move right there. So why would you do that? You would do that to be able to open the community in through the remaining space into the building. And unfortunately, I don't see any drawings that show what that experience would actually be like coming from the outside to the inside. As well, by getting rid of one of the 4 walls, what you're doing is you're exposing the ends of 2 of the walls. So instead of being an enclosed structure, all of a sudden the brick, you're seeing the end of it. And that's very important in terms of the spatial quality of the whole site. And I can't see that or imagine the way you're imagining that wall would look where it's exposed. I think removing the wall is a strong idea, but you haven't made the argument yet strongly enough for your case. As well, I can understand in plan precisely what your intent is with your stacked volumes, one on top of the other, and the way they successively turn out toward the community as they rise up. But I think that that quality is much more able to be understood as an idea and in plan than it is in either the experiential drawings or in the section drawings that you've created. The perspective drawing in the middle, I think the columns that you've drawn sort of tear down the floating nature of these pivoting pieces where they come out. And the relationship of each one of these pivoting pieces to the one above it isn't so clear. You can't really understand this notion of successive movement in the drawing. And the section drawings at the top, although I can understand the connection to the courtyard, again, I can't understand these turning pieces as pieces. And so they need to be expressed more independently, I think, and they need to really express that volumetric movement from inside to outside. As well, I'd like to see more of a partie sketch from the air where I can understand the building concept as a whole. There's a lot going on here, but there's a lot being left to our imagination.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. I agree with the comments, Tony. I think it's a complex building that you tried to do, and I think kind of the time was a little bit short to, you know, like for the development of this project. I think there's a lot of good qualities about it, but it's kind of sad that the representation is not there, because it makes everything a little bit less legible. kind of the choice of color palettes, also materiality is a little bit left to interpretation. Um, so, so yeah, I think the comments are pretty clear. Um, there's a lot of intention, and perhaps, you know, we need to work a little bit harder in the way that we represent the ideas a little bit better. Um, if Bea doesn't have any further comments, I think we should perhaps move on, unless Tony, you have also final comments.
I think I have received a lot of valuable comments. I think it's enough for me to make my next move.
And just quickly for me, I would say if you had to, you know, for your portfolio to do like one quick step further, give more information on the materials. I think that would be more beneficial. And then also the experience. You created some outside views, but there isn't enough of the experiential, you know, moving around, moving from one space to another. So maybe that's something you can push forward.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Tony. So next one is Rachel.
Yep, Rachel.
Yep.
Come,
Yes.
come up.
Yes. So my name is Rachel, and so I'm gonna start sharing my screen now. So for this project, my design mostly focused on the context of the site, in which where the hostel makes use of the existing brick and like the enclosure of what was once an abandoned factory as something that would create a introspective courtyard in addition to the context of the site. Um, the collection of rain as somewhat was a major factor in the hostel's form because the sloped roof, as you could see here, kind of creates a unique experience within the hostel. And as I said before, using the enclosure of the existing brick walls, the design of the hostel wraps around the overall site. And the courtyard in the center was kind of created through this form so that it would express a sense of gathering that could be accessed by not only the travelers, but also by the neighbors. And by doing so, I only put entrances on the inside of the courtyard so that the travelers or the neighbors could are forced to go in and kind of make their way around the hostel as a whole. Therefore, I placed the cafe and the lobby on two different sides of the hostel. So it forces the people to go around the hostel and experience what they see on the inside as well as the outside. And this was the general form that I had in mind. And one of the things that I wanted to express through the renderings was how on the first floor it's a very public area rather than private. Therefore, even when you enter inside, you could clearly see the courtyard through the glass facade on the first floor. However, going to the second floor, it's a tiny balcony that is mostly just covered by walls and only has doors that travelers could enter through. And for the most part, the balcony is definitely closed off, and the way that it's made is so that the people that are staying there would be able to still have their own type of privacy instead of always being downstairs as well. And so I'm gonna go to my Miro board.
So the strength of this scheme is the strong ellipse-shaped courtyard that you've created in the middle that contrasts dramatically with everything else that's around. And I would suggest that that's a strong place to start the development of a project scheme. That being said, the strong single-minded way in which you've expressed this, the interior experience of this ellipse has totally swallowed the existing building. You may have well has made the argument, I don't really care about the brick building at all. Why don't we just tear it down and build something new? Because that's, for all intents and purposes, for me, what it appears that you've done here. So I think that the scheme is extremely plan driven, and I really question the three-dimensional imagery that I'm seeing on the left. Even as I accept the basic idea of opening the corner up and coming into the ellipse, I'd like to buy the position of the ellipse and the way it breaks through the existing courtyard into what would be new space.
I see.
Part of this ellipse might have one quality, part might have another quality, but you haven't really dealt with that at all.
I see.
As I would continue to evolve the scheme, I would think very carefully about the existing brick structure, and then I would think very carefully about the position of the ellipse. If you want it to be where it is in this odd in-between space, you have a responsibility to make the argument why that is exactly the right space for it, other than it being in the precise center of the entire project.
I see.
Yeah, I agree. I think, by wrapping your project around a new spatial figure, this public space, you gain a lot of control over what the qualities of that space are, right? You're no longer dependent on a wall of an adjacent building or really anything to condition that space, which I guess allows it to be a sort of ideal close to platonic shape, the oval. I think for me, I'd like to understand the payoff of kind of engulfing that space. I think it's pure geometry could be one. It's material condition, or it's the difference. It has a very, very strong difference between the lower level and the upper level. That might be another one. To me, it's probably not the rainwater. We collect rainwater from buildings all the time that have pretty normal pitched roofs, and you just collect it up and put it into pipes. Now, there may be an idea about that funnel shape being something important beyond the rainwater itself. Like, it actually is important because you're always aware of this focus on the center when you're up on the second floor, because the roofs are always sloping down towards the center. But you didn't really talk about that to any great degree. The other possibility is you're actually really interested in a radial situation, in which case you could imagine that the spatial planning of the project might actually have something more to do with the lines that are perpendicular to this central space. I'm not sure that would be a great idea, but I think beyond the public space itself and its qualities, I'm looking for kind of how it grows its its roots into everything else you're doing. Because once you get beyond that space now, your spatial planning is, I think it probably works, but I guess the architectural payoff or the experiential or geometric qualities for the rest of the building, I think is not yet being driven by this very strong singular move in the middle.
I see.
I want to talk a little bit about language. In the bottom left rendering, you've created a new architecture that with these windows that are arched suggests a thick load-bearing mass, and yet you have this series of very light columns underneath. But then on top of that, you have an overhanging shed roof that looks like a sort of 70s modernist home. I think for me, the easiest way for you to overcome the discontinuity between the different expressions that you're creating on the outside is to think more clearly about the expression of the volume as a whole. And the way to do that would be to back up from the project, create a small model that would show the connection to the community, and then express those forms as simply and clearly as possible. That would make the interior experience of the courtyard more clear and less diffuse with these overhanging roofs and floating disc shape that kind of floats over the thing. And it would also make clear the connection of this new sort of pochette, this new solid form that's kind of filling in the courtyard to its perimeter walls and to the existing construction. So back up, create a very simple model that shows the connection of the scheme to the community, keep it simple, and then have the architecture, the resulting experiential architecture, the walls of the building and the three-dimensional quality of the thing reflect that basic model rather than being something that is applied on. It would help you address the language issues you're facing.
Okay.
So
I think.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
It might help to think about, like I think probably in your mind as the author, if you could only keep one thing about this scheme, it would be the oval courtyard in the center. When I look at these drawings, I almost wonder if the roof is important and the water collection. Like another strategy would be to start with that and say the most important thing is this canopy that spans the site and it collects water and it's folded in just the right way to collect solar electricity or whatever, and it does all these things, but it doesn't have a single responsibility. It actually has to do a number of different things. It has to shape space, it has to provide shade, it has to drain the water, it has to be at the right orientation for solar panels, and actually has a few more participants in its form making, and it might, as a result, create a more complex shape. But it is the most present thing, which I think is what you're doing when you extend the broad edges out here and here. Like there's a version of this project which is all about the canopy, and then underneath that canopy, it's inhabited by pieces of program that could, one of which is a piece of the existing brick building, other pieces of which might be chunks of program, new buildings that you make. Which probably don't need to have the same architectural vocabulary as the existing brick wall, right? These arches come from the openings in the brick.
Yep.
These ones you're just sort of restating those in a new building. But it might allow you also to have a little more porosity. Like there's a version of this where this isn't the only way in and out of the center courtyard, but there's actually other sorts of alleys, and you have chunks of building that are collected underneath a very broad canopy, which is capturing the whole site. And maybe that broad canopy is what actually has the very strongly figured center opening.
Yeah.
but the the priorities of what matters the most might help. I think you're trying to be responsible, but in some ways, by trying to solve everything equally, you may be losing a little bit of the impact of an idea which really drives a project. Like, what is this project? When people come here and experience this, like, what is the thing that that is really memorable and that is going to create the quality of space that people will identify with this project, right?
I see.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. So I think Francisco's idea is a strong one, where one option would be to focus on the roof and to have a kind of floating disc that would have a hole in the middle that would create a much more flexible opportunity for having this shape perhaps change in 3D from 2D, where it could bend and fold and come down and interact with the rest of the project. And then your idea would be that the drainage and this floating piece would be the most important thing. The other way to go would be to say, no, it's an architecture of poche, it's very solid, it's a mass. And then at that point, the overhanging roof goes away altogether and becomes part of some sort of larger, more volumetric representation. So again, a basic model, a partie model, where you would back up and see the thing as a diagram would help give you control over what you believe your intent actually would be. And then the resulting project would be developed in response to that.
Okay, thank you.
One quick thing that I wanted to say, in your plan, again, we said it's very like a oval, it's very plan driven, it's very oval driven. And I think that in the end, your scheme has a lot of unresolved spaces, or let's say, or maybe they're like out of scale. Like I do, and this is something, the plan is the only image that I was able to see during our review so far. Everything else is new for me, but I remember that we talked about the redundancy of like the circulation and what is the program of all this space around the oval glass. I see that that has not been solved yet, so I think that maybe it could have been beneficial to, to have to keep developing this aspect of the project as well. I think that despite missing some reviews with me, you created a lot of drawings. Each drawing could benefit from a little more work, a little more feedback, and not only from me, but also from others. So that's something I'm sorry that we didn't get through all the way. But.
Yeah, as a closing comment, because I think like we're just 50 seconds left. Unless it's super intentional, I wouldn't really put like a dark sky into a image unless you really want to show some sort of relation with a bad
It's Pittsburgh.
Yeah, but like we have sunny like kind of great weather during summer. I would be a little bit more optimistic when it comes to an image that represents the totality of the project. Other than that, I think all the comments are super super informative, super helpful. So having said that, we should move on. Thank you, Rachel. And next one, Adia.
Okay. Hi, my name is Adya. So the core concept behind my project was understanding public and private and understanding the various gradients between it, but also moving towards an idea of collaborative versus individual, considering that the communal spaces in the hospital don't only serve for the hostel users, but for the neighborhood around the hostel at large. So, beginning with the ground floor, I decided to break the shell to open up into a plaza space that draws the community around and creates visual transparency using glass walls, which does allow transparency not only in the plaza but through the covered space and even the courtyard that follows. The plaza also has an overhead opening, which allows light in, not to make it a very dim space, and along with this also allows for visual transparency from the first floor. The courtyard has the idea of privately owned public spaces, which is very relevant in a lot of major cities in the US, and it's basically spaces where people can sit, relax, and not only meet people who live, who are visiting the city, but also people who are native in the city. Um, and then moving to the first floor, which becomes more individualistic and is more about these modular bedrooms that are meant for peace and solace, where people are mostly like in their own space compared to this very public ground floor. The warm materials in the bedroom give this more restful, very calm experience. The tension between the private and the public is also, I try to explore that and understand how like not only privacy in real life but also privacy in like a little bit of the digital realm makes us want to have a shell that we can have and also have this really open environment. So that's what I tried to create. And in the end there is this like dialogue between the shell and the brick compared to brick not being used in the new construction and creating more open spaces that serve the community.
Can you go back to the board, please?
So yes.
I'd like to see your plans.
Mhm.
You know, this is one of the few projects that I've seen at a second year level where the quality of the sections is actually stronger than that of the plans. I really like your sections a lot. Both of the ones I saw spoke of a kind of layered experiential procession from outside to inside. And they did so in a very clear way and with a very strong expression of material quality. As well, the interior perspective, the sort of payoff at the end is very, very strongly rendered. So these are all strengths of the project. I like the way that you use the detailed drawings of the perimeter facade as part of your presentation. I also like the way you use the photographs of the brick wall for the expression of your interior perspective. That being said, less strong for me is the development of the plan on the outside, in which I cannot understand this layered procession quite as clearly as I can in the section. And less clear also for me is the look of the volume where it spreads out from the existing volume and addresses the community. Again, I would have liked to have seen a drawing where you could have backed up, showed the connection to the buildings around in the neighborhood, and where I could have understand the massing strategy as a whole relative to the neighborhood rather than just locally and in this very inward focused way that you've done. But strong job.
I like the strategy as well. You know, the move of basically building half of the existing brick shell and creating that space that you drew in your perspective, I think is great. And I have to say, I have a soft spot in my heart for urban spaces that are human. The fact that they're eating hot dogs and not caviar is a good thing. The front too, I really like this invention of this sort of this curved a glazed circulation piece that also forms the entry canopy for the project. It almost reads in your sections as a series of irregularly spaced mullions. I think in your renderings they are in fact regularly spaced, but this thing floating up above, I think, is a nice way of creating an entry that actually provides some shelter, marks a clear point to go into the building, but also would work at night because of its glazed quality. You'd see some activity, it would be lit up at night. I wish it were a little more floating. Like, I think the fact that it's hovering above the ground and is active enhances its presence, and the big heavy concrete columns beneath it are, I think, take away from that. Like, I think you could support maybe the solid parts of that building, the part with the lower roof where the rooms are, with columns. And I'm not usually a fan of structural heroics, but if there was ever a place to do it, it would be there. So there's this kind of this thread of a footbridge that comes across. That said, upstairs, I wish you could walk around it. Like, to me, it's a real loss. Maybe you needed 2 more rooms because that's what the program said, but I think you should be able to circulate around that entire ring as a user upstairs, right? I should be able to walk this ring. And surely you could rearrange things a little bit to make that happen. And I think it would be stronger then, because then it would also become a social kind of condenser in the upstairs level, much more than it is when you have these 2 rooms blocking it off.
You know, that could have been made easier if, instead of having that be an exterior courtyard, it could have been an interior glass courtyard, perhaps. And that would have allowed you the freedom to be able to not create this sort of thin circulation that doesn't really have such a huge purpose, that sort of reconnects around the edge. Then you could have had one interior glass-clad courtyard, and then you would have come into the interior, passed through this interior light-filled space into this dense, low 1-story space, and then out into the exterior space at the end. I worry about creating 2 such important exterior spaces on the project, and the payoff for that volume in the front. And I agree with Francisco's comments about the heaviness of the columns and about the circulation on the outside.
To add on that, I think I really appreciate. I try to situate myself when I arrive to the hostel, and I really appreciate the clarity of, you know, that the commonality that happens on the ground floor, like the spaces 7, 6, and 5. As soon as you get to the interior, you have such generous but kind of balance. It's not off scale. I would say it's quite kind of enjoyable to see. Like, I imagine a lot of people hanging out there. The thing that throws me back when I was in that hostel in New Zealand like a year ago, I had like a similar space. I was thinking about the scale of the space, and how everything is wanna foster that interaction between people. I really appreciate that clarity. I think the L shape on the ground level is kind of intentionally making the plaza, intentionally kind of designing the plaza, how one reads that plaza by that corner condition. That's pretty clear. I'm not super fan of the kind of the atmospheric condition that you convey in the render, in the dark night render. I don't know if because of the materials, or it's a little bit impersonal. I think paradoxically, I get more, more of the atmospheric condition looking just at the common room at the ground level than at that view, like from that perspective. Maybe the materials or something like that. I'm not really convinced by the idea of those kind of vertical, I think, metallic louvers or mullions that want us, that they exist on the wall of the existing shell. I think I would rather have, a solid wall that separates the exterior with the interior to have a little bit more of privacy, since you are opening that space to the interior courtyard of the shell. I don't know to what point it's necessary to kind of be fully transparent. Other than that, I enjoy the project.
You've put your umbrellaed figures in the foreground of your perspective over what I think is probably a weak corner of your project. As you would look down that wall and your new 2-story white volume would be coplanar with the brick that would be beyond it, and then turn the corner and form this curtain wall structure. I think all of that needs to be resolved still in 3 dimensions as I'm imagining the shape as a whole. But again, it's hard for me to see the shape as a whole because I'm not really seeing it anywhere on the project. It would help you to study the thing as a whole if you could see it and walk around it in the model, and then present that endeavor to us.
I would say that this is one of the few projects that I've seen so far that really gives meaning to the interior court. So to 2 things, like the interior courtyard against the shell. It's finally not like a residual space where you can just grow like a teeny tiny tree that may or may not have enough light to grow. I think, and also I really appreciate the fact that it creates a unique green space where there isn't, like Troy Hill, it's tough to have like a parklet that is not on steps or hills or like broken down. So I actually think it's an interesting condition. At the same time, it is true that there is a lot of public space because there is also the other side of the plaza, but it's a very different nature. It's very much part of the hostel. And overall, like I think that this project takes care of a lot of urban conditions and really creates some interesting things that I haven't seen in other projects. I also agree with the other comments of the critics, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Adia, do you have any final comment?
No, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate the feedback.
All right, so if we don't have any other comments from Eric or Francisco, I think we should move on then. Okay. Well, thank you, Adia. Ankita, I think you're
yeah.
You're closing this.
I'm Ankita. So I'm just going to share a presentation with you all, and then move on to Mira once the presentation is over. So starting with this hostel design, I saw it as a really interesting opportunity as a means of urban regeneration and a way to promote a sense of community within the neighborhood, which I thought doesn't or is not really strong at the moment. So the whole idea was to challenge sort of public versus private spaces and sort of provide a variety of different communal spaces in which people can interact with one another and sort of really invite the public to sort of interact with the residents and amongst themselves as well. So as you can see in the section perspective, the this idea of a central courtyard is something that's pretty strong in my project, and it sort of allows for a pretty big gathering space and also sort of interacts with the interior flexible program spaces. So there's that interaction between interior and exterior spaces. So this is a view of what I imagine the interior courtyard could look like. So having also the forms above sort of offset from one another to create a more dynamic feeling, and then the use of color and sort of allowing the public to really be able to sort of interact with one another, and then windows on the floors above so that people can sort of view out and they always have that visual connection to that central courtyard. So all the primary circulation, or at least most of it, sort of has a visual connection to that courtyard. And one, it allows for some natural light to come into these interior spaces. But again, I think that visual connection is something that's really strong. So looking at the ground floor plan, this idea of having sort of larger flexible spaces rather than separate rooms for different things, I think is what would tie the community together. And it sort of led to this coil-like formation, where as one enters, there's this diagonal form that interrupts the plaza space and sort of invites people in with this transparent facade. And then as one enters, they're sort of drawn into this sort of spiral condition where they can interact with not only the central courtyard, but also a smaller back courtyard in which they can actually experience what it's like to be in between that shell and the new form. So this is just, so this is an axon of what the building form would look like. And I think here it's worth noting that I didn't really look at the shell as an artifact in a way that it's something that has to be completely preserved. So for example, like you'll notice that most of the old openings were actually closed up, and there are new openings that are punched in that have a more similar language to the new form. And there's definitely a strong contrast between, if someone were in one of the side alleys and looking at the brick wall versus being in that interior courtyard. I think there's there's a pretty strong juxtaposition and sort of contrast between the new and the old. And then just continuing on to ideas of public versus private, and sort of not just having public spaces be, or gathering spaces be in the ground floor, but allowing the residents themselves to sort of interact on the top floors. That's not just limited to, being in their bedroom or sleeping in their bed or whatever, but sort of being able to have different like lounge spaces. So here, just one space highlighted on the third floor where the residents would actually be able to, have a conversation outside of their rooms and also away from the public. But then again, still having like a lot of natural light and views to that central courtyard. And I guess another idea that was pretty prominent was, rather than having like transition between volumes, it was sort of all about a continuity. So the idea of having these curved walls as well to sort of give that flow and that space of like people being sort of together. And then also challenging some of those ideas related to privacy in the bedroom spaces. So rather than, as opposed to like a hotel with individual rooms, sort of using these modules in which people could also just have a conversation, or it's something where it doesn't just restrict the bedroom to being a place just for being by yourself, but actually like facilitates that interaction that you could get in a youth hostel. And then I guess at the end, it's just worth noting that I tried to play around with color quite a bit. So sort of using vibrant colors like oranges and greens and sort of adding to that playfulness and like contrasting, as you saw in the earlier render, like the white interior, the white walls of the courtyard contrasting to the orange and green of the other interior walls. And yeah, I think that's mostly it. Sort of just switching to my mirror right now. And yeah.
Thank you, Angela. Eric, I think you're muted. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. So I think the strength of this scheme is this coiling form that sets within the existing courtyard and then breaks through it and then comes and out into the community. I appreciate that shape a lot and the resulting spaces that it creates around. As well, I am very thankful to see this aerial axonometric that actually shows the connection to the community. There's strong things about that drawing, and there's weak things about it. On the other hand, I can see it, and so I don't have to imagine so much as I had to in many of the different other schemes. So all of that is positive. On the other hand, I find the perspectives and the section drawings less strong than the overall scheme. It's hard for me to read this bending, folding shape in section. It's hard for me to understand this as a sort of singular form that's wrapping around inside the walls of the brick. And I'm okay with the fact that you've broken out the fourth wall of the brick. Yet I'd like to see that intersection between the existing brick and the new structure expressed and developed even that much more clearly. Oh, and then one last thought. I had the critic Raphael Mineo when I was a student once, and I said exactly what you said about creating walls with curves in them so that people could flow between one space and another. And he corrected me saying that people weren't actually like pinballs that work their way around corners that way. And in fact, the experience didn't actually change just by making a corner round. So if you're truly wanting an architecture that flows, then you really have to make it clear from an experiential point of view rather than creating a symbol of such a thing at a smaller scale.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think your plans are beautiful. The the reading of this snake of laminated surfaces, which are plastic and fold or bend around the corners, I think really is your primary architectural syntax. And I would say like there are a few places where your planning fights against it, like this. My annotations out real quick. Having this what I assume is like back of house reception here is less than ideal if you're trying to kind of encourage a reading of that wall kind of flowing around the corners and following that wall as you circulate around the building.
Right.
I do think there's ways you can, like if you need to have that there, I think there's ways of doing it. Will you zoom in just a little bit and I'll suggest them? I think you could actually architecturalize this idea of lamina at the next smallest scale. So, maybe this wall for this room starts here and comes along and wraps, right? And then the counter, instead of butting into it, actually slides past. Sorry, it's hard to draw with the mouse. Slides past it, right? And then the wall, the back wall, which is coming from this side, runs along. Maybe it curves and stops short, and you actually have a window, here or something. Like you could actually think of this whole sandwich from here to here as a sort of lasagna, series of layers, and every articulation you make is an articulation of those surfaces, whether they be counters or walls, sliding along one another. And then you would get this kind of, I think your broader sort of articulation and massing strategy would then begin to evidence itself in the smaller kind of moments of the articulations of how the reception desk works and how the place where they keep all the keys or the stationery next to the counter, which has to be a closed room. I think there's opportunities there. My critiques are almost all quibbles. Like this condition here and this one here, I don't love. I think it's it's kind of a butt joint, and I would say like there's art. Oops, sorry. There might be ways of doing a similar thing here. Since you have this faceted form, you might very well be able to actually pull this wall out. Sorry, it's way too thick. Trying to draw is with what is this program called? Zoom is almost impossible. But you might be able to pull this wall out. I'm just going to draw it larger. Like here's the masonry wall. And then you have your lining wall, which presumably needs to be there to capture all the insulation, things like that. And it folds out, and you actually see it disappearing. And you have, a 4-inch gap or something, a little reveal. So you get a shadow line between the face of the brick and, this wall. It appears now to dive behind that brick. I think there's a lot of opportunity for articulations that follow along kind of what it is you're basically doing spatially with your project. And which I really like, but I would include that as well. As much as I like your proposal for the boxes where your people are sleeping, if your project is about this kind of these plastic surfaces, like rather than treating those as furniture, I mean, I think it's a terrific idea, but it's sort of a different idea than what you're working with in your building. And I wonder if those boxes could equally be like, if you think about the interior surface of these rooms, like maybe that peels out in two places and actually creates the sides of this stacked box of bunk bed rooms that you're making, instead of having them be more furniture-like and placed within the larger volume.
Okay, so like sort of like built in, like part of the form is what you mean.
Yeah, like if this is your exterior wall, like think of the outside surface of your wall and the inside surface of your wall as two different surfaces, right? So maybe the inside surface, well, maybe not that radius, but folds out, and somehow in here is where your beds are, right? So, maybe that's perforated metal or something that has this kind of translucent quality that you want for the beds. But that becomes yet another layer, another surface in this kind of lamina of plastic surfaces that spirals around itself to make the building.
Okay.
So I might think, if I were you, of the existing wall and the new building more as two separate things rather than one big volumetric thing. The corner issue, Francisco, that you mentioned on those two sides is the result of the volume sort of pressing up so tightly against that brick wall. And if you could allow that wall to breathe a little bit, it might free you to think in a more plastic way about the way this white volume on the inside wraps and bends and folds. As I would continue forward with the project, I would think about how, as active as the shape is in plan, and Francisco, you commented on that, I think it's sort of static as a whole, as a three-dimensional form. And you can begin to create new openings in the shape to respond to specific conditions that would allow this shape to change from one that is basically a big white mass with some punched openings to something that's much more flexible in terms of its development.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very comment. For all its strengths, even spatially, you don't have a single, I think, double height space anywhere in the building.
Right.
And if this building were 10% larger in plan, that would create maybe some room for you to have sectional connections between levels where appropriate. That would engage the section more in kind of the spatial dynamics that you've got going in plan.
As well, it would make more powerful the perspective experiences that you're creating of the inside, both in the three-dimensional courtyard as viewed from the ground, but then also in the upper floor view of the courtyard through these odd punched openings, as you would think in a more flexible way about this shell shape. I agree with your thought about the two-story spaces, Francisco, but also the idea of opening up to the interior could really make the interior experience of the building much more filled with light and much more open to the interior, which is clearly your intent. As well, the sort of live-in structures on the right read like little sort of independent modules that are sort of inserted into this volume, like marbles being dropped into a container. And as the architecture would continue to develop, these marbles could become much more connected to the architecture of the rest of the building, so that you don't have to have A, brick architecture, and then B, white architecture, and then C, this interior wood architecture. All of the new stuff could become much more kind of Gumby, much more connected one to another.
Okay, yeah.
Those slivers are really nice in your courtyard, like those slight offsets. And you could easily have those on the inside in your plan, like even if you don't have space to have a full space, which is double height. I can imagine one of those 2 to 3 foot slivers of space against the exterior wall, maybe in that corner where you have a public space, just a double height kind of moment where light slides down or you hear some noise from the floor above. Like it could be more active on the inside. You're a little bit pancakey. Your space is a little bit pancakey on the inside.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And one more thing, as I'm thinking about the existing building, the new shape reads so strongly that it makes the existing brick on the outside, especially because you've broken it at one wall, seem like it's just going to tip over. It seems so sort of weak relative to this strong thing that you've created. So either as you develop your shape, I think it needs to become lighter, which will make the brick seem heavier, or perhaps you could alter the brick. The brick could turn the corner and come back for 3 feet so that you read the end of the wall as stronger. Or perhaps you could create some sort of sunshade device or something on the perimeter of the wall that would make it appear to be stronger. And that way, you might make more clear the connection of the new and the old, which is what we've both been advising that you do in the future. So it's partly operating upon your own building, but perhaps you could act upon the wall as well.
Right. Yeah.
Those are great comments, Ankita. I'm now that I'm seeing the whole, all the documents put in on Mirrorboard. One thing though that I could be a little bit more careful, this is for your portfolio perhaps, is the use of how you're using the color should be perhaps a little bit more consistent across the documents. So first of all, I appreciate the colors. This is a theme that we have been talking about throughout the process of your project, how those colors start revealing out in the bird view kind of 3-dimensional axle, where the windows start revealing a little bit that color from the interior, so on and so forth. I think now that I'm thinking a little bit better, if you're using, for instance, say orange to communicate that you are in, say, in the second floor at some parts of the building, perhaps I could use another color to represent the courtyard, inside the ground of the courtyard. And and perhaps if you're using like that color in the courtyard in that central image, I would use it as well in the floor plan, since since your project is really kind of color driven as well. It's not just a representation tool, but rather has some sort of meaning behind. That's only like just a minor comment to this conversation. I think all the comments provided by the external guests have been really, really valuable, and I appreciate them. So having said that, I think we're good with the timing. What we're gonna do now is the other concurrent review has one student more. We are all from this review are gonna be switched to the other one by Jeremy. I think he doesn't have a mic, so you guys are gonna be assigned to the other breakout room so we can see the last student from this morning session, and then we all will conclude by, I guess, 12:20 to have final comments.
Great.
Manuel, I have to apologize. I have a
Oops.